right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Around the Booth. I am Matt Rolfe, Hospitality Leadership Coach. I'm really excited about today to have another conversation about leadership in our industry. And wow, has a lot changed since the last time we've done one of these shows. I'm seeing more change in the market now than ever before, and that's really what we want to discuss here. I know there's so much great content on the SVK Network, thanks to the incredible hard work that Jay does. The intention of these shows is to have a different focus on a different area of your business. Once we have the right menus, the right people, the right specs, the right costing, the right venue, then we can really need to focus on the people inside that operation, and leadership really starts with us. For today's show, I'd really like to bring forward a dear friend of mine, somebody that I met during the pandemic. And part of my goal or wants during the pandemic was to look across our borders to people that were influencing leaders inside of our industry, people that were making change, people that were very, very passionate about what we needed to do to not only transition what we were going through pandemic and post-pandemic recovery, but just deeply passionate in their careers about our industry. So I'd like to introduce to you now Monte Silva, who's a restaurant executive coach working with high-performing executives inside our industry. Monte, it's an absolute pleasure of mine to have you dialing in with us today from Tampa. For those that are watching in Canada, some of you are going to chirp me, but I don't usually wear a sweater on, but I had to pull my Toronto Maple Leafs shirt on. Monte's, he's a fan of the Sharks or the Predators. But since Monte is based out of Tampa and the Leafs are going to win the cup this year through Tampa Bay, I just want to show the flag. Monte, it's nothing against you, but welcome to, this show reaches a lot farther outside of just the Canadian audience, as the show really is across North America, Mexico, and many other markets. But I'm really excited for you to share your experiences, as in my experience and opinion, the U.S. market is farther ahead in its recovery and experience. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, and we'll jump right in here today.
Sure. Sounds great. Thanks. So just to start off, the Lightning doesn't have sweaters because it's 80 degrees down here right now, but good for you. Root your team on.
Thank you.
So I started in the restaurant industry like a lot of other people in the hourly ranks as a dishwasher at 15, and worked my way up through prep and line cook positions, and then moved to the front of the house and was a busser and server and bartender, and did that for the first almost 20 years from the time I was 15 years, from the time I was 15 till I was 30. And then decided that I wanted to continue to do this for a living, and jumped into restaurant management and spent the last 25 years in restaurant management, upper management, everything from chef to chef, beverage director, bar manager, service manager, GM, managing partner, director of ops, and just really had very fortunate. I had a very successful career and a lot of time in the industry. And now I'm using that as an executive restaurant coach to help executives and owners, help them along the way to create better restaurants for the public and create better workplaces for their employees, and just help them have better quality of life as they lead their teams.
I love that. And one thing I want the audience to just hear as we look to bring different guests, expose our core audience here to different leaders with different perspectives, is what Monte's going to share today is not ideas. They're not thoughts or things that we could do or that we've kind of written out in the back office. These are really based on his experiences. And I think Monte's very, very humble based on some of the operations that he's had a chance to lead, run, be an operating partner in, be involved in. His career is stacked with just incredible experiences. One thing before we jump in today, what was kind of one of the best moments in time? I don't want to say what's the best operation you ever worked with or led, but what was the point where, when it came to the team that you were working with and the guests that you were serving and the market that you were in, what was one of those moments that just really you look back on and say, wow, that was amazing, and why?
Good question. I think for me, I think when I understood the shift, I used to, being an A-type personality, I used to be very focused on the task, right, and the success and achieving the goal. And I think for me, a pivot point in my career was when I understood that I can't run through people. I can't go through people to get to my objective. I have to work with people, and bring out the best in them to really execute the goals and mission and the things that I was charged with. The responsibilities that I had, and so that kind of happened. I don't know, 15 years ago for me, and it completely changed the trajectory of my operation from having to really be in there and micromanage things to really be able to step back and allow people to grow and lead and do some amazing stuff and look at people. You talk about in your book, have empathy for people and understand that they're where they are. And it's really changed my career for sure.
Yeah. And Monte, I just really appreciate that from a vulnerable stance. When I look back at the biggest lesson in my career as a leader was when I really started to listen to people as they left the company. And part of the feedback, as I looked at the pattern of feedback and I look at my own growth and development, is what I heard that they shared was they didn't know which Matt was going to show up because there was so much pace and force. And I thought it was well intentioned that I was helping and supporting. But one day I'd be jumping on the table, high fiving everybody. The next day I'd be jumping on the table saying, why are we not doing? Why are we not doing? So people appreciated the energy, but they didn't appreciate the inconsistency that my energy brought at times. So when I was really slow down, get comfortable with my own skin and got clear on my job as a leader is to support be there to support others. They're not there to support me. So when I flipped the paradigm or flipped the pyramid upside down and really started to serve my people with intention, not just direction, but intention and development, it changed my career. But I can tell you, it took a long time.
Yeah, I learned the hard way as well. I think that when you come to that realization that it's more important about the people than it is the task, you change. I went from I'm going to get the best out of you so that I can achieve what I need to do to as your leader and someone that cares about you, I'm going to push you to be the best version of yourself every day. Because if you leave and you go somewhere else, you're going to be able to take those things that you learned and that you were able to practice and really do something great with yourself. And one of the exciting things for me when I left Nashville during COVID and moved to Florida was I look back over the 15 years I spent in Nashville, and there were 37 salaried people that were chefs, sous chefs, bar managers, service managers, beverage directors, GMs that had all been servers, bartenders, bussers, food runners, and line cooks for me. And so that was a very humbling, but a moment of gratitude where I really felt like I had made a contribution. And when COVID hit, I thought, well, how can I take that beyond Nashville and share the importance of that message to the rest of the country?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So just one of the things, and part of the show is, we respect the leaders that are watching it. We respect the talent and experience. What we're just trying to do is stimulate thought, maybe agitate, maybe we find some resistance where we share something you don't agree with. And that's perfectly fine to just to pay that some attention. And where does the resistance come from? Or just spark some thought as you look at your operation or your age and stage or legacy of your leadership. Where are you at? And that question is, what is your role, right? Sometimes our role is to achieve a result. Monte just shared something I think really beautiful there, and I would agree, is that our role sometimes is in support and development of others. How do we get them to be the best version of themselves for themselves, not just for us? And I think as we talk, we'll get into some pieces here. We might not get deep into this, but when we talk about attraction and retention and hiring crises and all the stuff that we're hearing, but when you have a philosophy and a belief and values like Monte's, it really does flip that on its head. So just to jump in, and I'd love to get your share here, because I think a lot has changed in so many different ways over the last few years. And I don't want to talk about the pandemic, the P word, but just has changed in our next chapters. What does hospitality mean to you? Like what, just if you wanted to give a brief description or example, like what does it really mean to you? How does it exist today?
Yeah. So I think that, interestingly, 20 or so years ago, we shifted what we called our industry. It went from the food and beverage industry to the hospitality industry.
Sure.
But I think that most operators missed that connection. They knew it in their head, right? They knew, okay, we're going to focus on hospitality. This is what we are. But they didn't understand that we went from product to people. We went from from selling food or serving food to serving people. And that's a shift that I think, until recently, until COVID, that wasn't really the social norm or the belief system. Books, like I grabbed Can't Do It Alone, your book that you wrote.
Thanks for the book. Yep.
You bet. I think that, we're now starting to get that and what that looks like. But to kind of talk about what hospitality means to me. So I feel like service is a skill set. It can be taught. Hospitality is more of a mindset. And so when I'm hiring for my restaurant or I'm working as a coach with clients, I talk about focusing on finding the right people, the right attitude, the right mindset, because we can teach them the skill sets, but it's much more difficult to change the mindset of someone. And so that's one thing. Another thing is I believe service is where we meet or exceed the guest's physical needs. But I think that hospitality is when we meet or exceed the guest's emotional needs. And nothing could be more important since COVID, when we were all locked up and, we just wanted to get out and see people again. And, I jokingly say that, the person that used to annoy us, that would ask 700 questions about allergies and things like that, we're like begging, please come in,
Yep.
I want to talk to somebody. I want to serve somebody. And so I think that, our industry still needs to understand what hospitality really looks like. And I think that there's some of the old regime that is anti-tech, because they think that it's going to replace the human experience. But I think that as long as technology helps us better our engagement with people, I think it's only going to help us.
Yeah, I think that's a big conversation around how does tech support the experience, not automate the experience. But to come back, like just some things, if you wanted to take away, depending, no matter where you are, front of house, back of house, vendor, operator side, if you just write out, and I'm making notes here as Monte talks, but if we talk about skill set versus mindset. So again, skill set might be the experience, but what's the mindset of the person? But also, what's the mindset you're looking? What are your values? What is your mindset? One thing where I had a great workshop yesterday with about 35 leaders from a multi-site restaurant group based here out of Toronto, Canada. And what we really focused on is, what are our wants and needs? Like, we want to hire for this. And are we communicating our values in our job ads, in our interviews, in our training, in our induction, training, and coaching, as we look at all different stages? But such a simple way to look at it. And then the physical need. So I'm thinking sometimes when we talk about hospitality, we think about a hotel or a full service restaurant or a high-end restaurant, but I'm thinking about the coffee shop operator listening right now, or the quick service restaurant that's listening right now and thinking about their operation. No matter what the transaction size or experience is, we still have a physical and emotional need. And I think there's some remarkable brands out there creating great quick service, emotional experiences. And we have obviously great full service brands or fine dining or hotels. But one thing that I've really looked at is we look for the data trends, and Monte's based in the US, and I saw some data out of the NRA recently. And what they shared was, based on recent surveys, what people wanted after the pandemic was to go back into an environment and connect. So they want to connect with those they missed, their friends. Now what the transition shifted to at the end of last year from the research and surveys is what they want is an experience. If I have less discretionary dollars, why should I bring those to create an experience? And what is the experience that I might not necessarily be able to create at home? Again, whether it's a nice coffee for here in Toronto, I bought a coffee today, Monte, for $9. I think that's getting a little bit much. So again, I'm not a cheap person, but I was a little bit of sticker shock on a $9 latte, but sure, why not? As long as it's matched with an experience. But I also got pizza, where I went in and picked up from a quick service place this week for my kids and had a great experience. So what does that experience look like for you? To transition to leadership, because I think you have so much to share, and please feel free to add to that. But when it comes to hospitality leadership, you shared so much there of what the transition was from people, from product to people, from product to the guest. But tell me a little bit, as you have exposure to so many great operators through your coaching, is what does hospitality look like for you? What are some examples? The book I love most is the yellow one. I feel very humbled to be beside it, but Unreasonable Hospitality, I'm sure it's that one. There's just so many.
Yeah, that is that one.
In Will's book, that book blew my mind. But if anybody hasn't read it, I really feel that you should, if you just want to really learn the art of storytelling. But tell me, in kind of your experience, Monte, what does hospitality leadership look like, mean? How does it exist inside a restaurant today?
So thank you for that question. I think I think that the answer that seems very obvious, but so hard to do, is to model that. And as a leader, we can talk about things. We can write culture statements and mission statements and have them plastered all over. But if you're not showing up every day as a leader and really modeling that and showing people what that looks like, then you're missing out, and you're not going to bring the team along with you. And I think that starts with how we treat our employees. If we say, hey, take care of the guest, and then we treat our employees poorly, then that's a reflection. They're like, well, okay, why would I take care of the guests? You obviously don't get hospitality. Yeah. When I look for the mindset, when I'm talking to people, the first 10 or so questions I ask in an interview have nothing to do with the resume. I already have the resume. Yeah. I'm looking at who they are, who you are, and how you provide service, as Danny Meyer talks about, is more important than the actual act itself. The impression that the guest has about how does the server feel about me personally, and how do I feel about about myself as I'm being cared for, are super important. And I think that as a leader, that starts with how we treat our team, and then modeling that to the guest as well. If we're locked up in our office and not on the floor during the dinner service, then we're not modeling, hey, this is important enough for me to stop what I'm doing and being out there. And I think that that's a critical thing. When I opened a steakhouse in Nashville, a very prominent steakhouse out of Ohio, I had 250 plus resumes for food server positions, and I organized them in, most experienced to least. And so obviously the early interviews might be with someone that had 20 years as a server in a steakhouse, and maybe a second level somm, so they had some great wine knowledge.
Sure.
All the way down to the entry level, server type positions. But when I interviewed them, I didn't even ask them questions about, do you really know wine? I asked them things like, where'd you grow up? You have siblings? Are you the oldest sibling? Are you the youngest sibling? Because you can get some information from some of those questions. And just even listening to them and watching their facial expressions as they talk about their siblings gives you a lot of in-depth, idea about who that person is. What do you like to do when you're not here, when you're not working? And I had a server who was, probably 30, 40 interviews down the line, that said, well, I like to volunteer with the blind. It's like, okay, hired. Why would I not hire somebody that cares enough about people, and you talk a lot about having empathy for others. And so that's kind of how I model it. And that's how I build teams. Culture's very much like agriculture. If you want an orange tree, you got to plant orange seeds, right? And then, so if I want hospitality to be at the core of what we do, then I got to find those seeds, those people, and hire those people. And then I have to put them in a fertile soil, the culture that's going to allow the nutrients and the things to get in and work with them. And then I'm going to have to water it. And, watering is training and coaching and developing. And then I have to provide sunlight, which is when we go back and we we honor people. Maybe we read an online review or they gave phenomenal service and we're mentioned by name, and we share that and highlight them, is kind of like providing sunlight. And I think that the best way to really create those hospitality experiences is to hire that kind of person, lead, model, train, develop those people, and then put them in a culture that's very hospitality driven.
Yeah. And so much you shared in there. There's a couple things just to take a second, to go deeper on. So for those that are listening to this in Canada, and we want to create some positive leverage for change. One thing we do in our coaching is we talk about what you did in 2022, even if you were highly successful, won't lead to the same results in 2023. One of the challenges right now that we're seeing as a trend in our market is sales are up based on inflation, menu price inflation. So the average menu has gone up 12%. So top line sales look good. Bottom, there's over close to 69% of Canadian operators that are at break even or a loss right now. I'll repeat that for those 69% at a break even or a loss currently, and hopefully we'll rebound coming out of spring. But the challenge right now is that transactions are declining. So when transactions, so top line revenue is up, but there's no profit in the top line, and we're seeing a decline, a possible foot traffic decline of 10 to 20% for the average operator, depending on your concept. This isn't all doom and gloom. But if we take action, and what Monte shared there is that it should hospitality be first. And if it is first, are we talking about it? One thing that's been really eye-opening for me this year is I'm going into workshops and asking senior leaders just to listen to their teams and ask them what their measurement of success is. And the average core manager, assistant manager, AGM, possibly GM or supervisor's definition of success is labor, food cost, beverage cost, budget, profit. And that's how we're measuring success. So that's what's getting their attention. Monte shared it. We don't want them in the office during peak hours. We want them on the floor. But if your measurement and celebration of success with your leaders is based on metrics, not based on the behavior that produces the metric, and I know this is a bit deep, but hospitality experiences done consistently, relentlessly will produce your targets if you have the right systems in place. So the key thing, the question, and I'm not here to project anybody listening, but what are you measuring? Because the measurement is what we focus on. What we focus on improves. So I think it's so important there. And what you shared about ranking and really looking, what was clear when Monte talked about his hiring process is he knew who his employee avatar was. Like we're looking for certain personality types. There's not one, but say for a host role, there's what we coach our clients on. What are your 3 core avatars? The 3 slightly different personalities and their core traits that allow you to fill your employee grids. There's a very clear process there. And one thing I want everybody from a leadership perspective, Monte talks in such a clear and concise way, just based on comfort levels experience. And I really admire that about him. It's just the pace of confidence based on experience, because clear is kind and people can hear it. So there's so many leaders, we're halfway through here today, but if we just did a rewind, I could re-listen to Monte share there for the 6-7 minutes that he did and take 5 or 6 things that I could take to make my business easier, to have better retention, and to have a more focused guest experience. So, and thanks, Monte, for that. That isn't a transition I've done on the show in the past. It's really I want to pause, right? Sometimes it's about how do we absorb content. Content's free these days, and we have an overflow of content. What I know Jay's hope really is how do people take what he's doing, SVK's doing, Cisco's doing, and do different inside their operations to get the results they want and deserve. So I think there's just so much there that if we slow down, how do you learn and act on what's best for your own operation? But what do you think is the most positive thing that's happened in our industry in the last 3 years? Like, what is a trend or a change that you've seen that has a positive impact? And based on those trends or changes, what would your advice be to an operator to kind of leverage the momentum that has been created over the last 3 years? I know there's so much doom and gloom, but there is so much positivity that we're experiencing across North America right now.
Right. Yeah, I think that earlier than that in 2020, I think that with the closing of restaurants, where everyone was being shut down, whether they were going to reopen or not, it really offered an opportunity for reflection that our industry has never had. It's unfortunate that we're so busy working in our business that, the majority of our brothers and sisters in the industry don't take the time to read a book and learn and grow themselves, right? And so there's so many great books. You talked about Will Guidara's. Interestingly, when I worked for Wolfgang Puck, Will's dad was the president of our company, and I worked directly for him. And then, obviously, earlier in my career, I picked up Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table, and Will, a lot of what he learned was at 11 Madison. So working that closely with Danny definitely influenced him. But I think that pause that we took was super important, and I know that's pre-2022 that you're referring to. But that pause allowed us to kind of rethink some stuff. So when we hit these hurdles of supply chain issues and demand and inflation and all these things, we had some time to pause and kind of collect our thoughts. And some of the things that people are now understanding in 2022, 2023 is how we shifted and navigated from the old model and the old false beliefs that we had that really screwed up, our industry. And I think that looking forward, rather than condemning the new generation that is saying, no, I'm not going to work 70 hours a week. Everyone's like, oh, you don't have a good work ethic, but that's not it. They are going to demand something better for themselves. And I think that our industry has a better understanding of what that looks like, whether it's, it's not really pay, although obviously people have to have to be able to earn a livable wage, but it's more about respect and growth and opportunity and being cared for and being treated, like we would treat our guests. And I think that we're seeing more of that. We're seeing a big focus on retention. I know you talk about it. Jim Taylor on the other side of Canada talks about that a lot. I think that there's a lot of industry leaders like yourself that are really pushing that of retention, caring for our people is super important. And I really see that even being stronger in 2023.
Yeah. And I love that trend, right? So there's a pause. Once we have a pause, we create different awareness. Where we talk about once we have different awareness, we have different choices. It's what do we do with it? And I think now is that we learn from it. We just don't go back to what we, our old patterns or behaviors, which is easy. Just natural human reaction is to go back to what we know, but stay the course of what worked in communication and connection. And I like to talk about retention, but really want to talk is how do we, as humans, not as employees or teams, how do we care about the people we spend more time with, usually than our friends and family, to make sure that we have a positive experience. So the questions we ask is, what's your promise to your people and what's your promise to your guest? And how do you follow through on those commitments? What's one challenge that came out of the pandemic? One thing that people need to keep their eye on, they need to react to in your experience and opinion, that this trend is happening. And if you're not keeping your eye on it or reacting, it could cause challenges or issues for your people or your operation.
I think there's a couple things. I think that what's interesting is we have to take a serious look. I think there's a lot of blame being put on COVID about rising prices and stuff. I don't necessarily think that we're now at a point where supply chain issues are as difficult as they were.
Yep.
But I think that we have to be careful about, it's super important to look at your vendors as partners, and hopefully they care about your business and you care about their business, and collectively you can work on a really great partnership. But I think we just need to be careful. I think that there's going to be people out there that are going to use the pandemic to keep prices really high and do some things to try to take advantage of our industry. And I think that we just have to make sure we're wisely assessing, what we're buying, who we're buying from, and revisit those relationships.
Yeah, I think one trend that we're seeing, I saw an analysis at a conference that I was at last week from one of the largest restaurant brands in North America. Just had some really good data from a partner, but it's clear to see who's taking price for profit and who's taking price to cover cost increase in different markets across North America. And very, very eye-opening, as we look to the trends, as people look to go out. In Canada, we're already seeing a trend where if people went out once a week, we say 4 times a month, they're already gearing down to 3 times and possibly into the QSR, or we're coming down from certain segments. So The funny example here in Canada is all the major grocery store brands have presented record profits, and the leaders of those brands in the media are saying it's by fluke. Is it? Did we really buy that much food? That, when we're looking at some of the price options, and I'm not here to get into that debate, but when it looks to our industry, I really encourage you to be properly priced and informed. But I am cautious about those that are clear indicators that we're taking price for profit 3, 4, 5 more points on certain menu items because the market awareness will allow us to. But is it sustainable for our guests? It's not my judgment to make that call for you, but there is a lot of chatter about guests buying behaviors and us as an industry. How do we be healthy and sustainable in our pricing strategies? So I really appreciate it. And I do think there's lots of additional trends that are coming out of the pandemic and challenges. But I do agree. What I loved how you framed that is there's positive. Like we are hearing improvements in supply chain. I did hear recently that one of our partners is having some costs come down on major items like beef with their contracts that they're signing. So there are some trends coming along that are very positive, and I hope that those continue. The pandemic did not create these issues. It magnified these issues. They pre-existed prior to the pandemic. It's how we react now. So just to transition as we go into kind of our last couple of questions here, Monte, and thank you so much for what you've shared. But we've had a lot of conversations. And for anybody who's not following Monte on LinkedIn or other social platforms, I really encourage that you do based on the value when he does post and what he does share. I learn from every time. But if you could only coach operators on one thing based on all of the tools in your toolkit and all of your experience, what would it be and why?
I would say that almost all of the clients that I work with as a coach, and even some of the most successful things that I've done as an operator in my own restaurant is to learn how to work. And you talk about this a lot, work on your business instead of in it. And I think that it's very easy to put your head down and focus and grind it out. And that's just not sustainable. Everyone talks about the industry. There's so many people that don't last very long.
Yeah.
For years and years and years, there was burnout. There was, addictions, divorce, all kinds of things that wreaked havoc on us because we allowed these things to be part of our life. And so if I could, I get the most satisfaction when I can help someone operate a great business. And a lot of my clients already have a great business, but they feel like they have to always be there to make that sustainable. And, my 45 years in the industry, over 15 in the hourly ranks and 25-ish in management, that's not sustainable unless you figure out how to create work-life balance and be able to create a system and people that are going to allow you to be able to step back and help people grow, which is great for them, and enable them to take on more responsibility and be able to delegate and then just follow up. So I would say that the one thing that most people hire me for and that I'm the most excited about is really changing their life where they can be in their business and take care of it and grow it and work on it, but then they can step away and have time with their family and do other things. It's super important. And it's even more important for me. I have a 4-year-old now, 4-year-old son, that it changes your perspective. When I was single, it was a different story. When I got married, I married a school teacher and she had a certain flow in her life, and I had to figure out how to work with that. And then adding a son to the equation is just something that, if you're going to be sustainable and be able to last more of the marathon that exists in a hospitality, your work life, you've really got to be able to work on the business and not just in it.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I think all of us out there, we hear the words and the words logically make sense. So, we think, of course, we have to work on our business. But I want to think about the emotional side. So I've got 2 quick stories here. One was from the session that I had yesterday, and I show up early to the session. This young manager is coming in to prep for the session, not on setting it up, but to prep her work so she's prepared. I meet her at the door. She's not expecting me, so I distract her. Somebody comes to do the kitchen repair, they distract her. Somebody comes in to do the beer delivery. Somebody comes in to do the food delivery. She blinks. It's 2 hours later, the session's starting, and I can see her deer in the headlights like, shit, I didn't do my work. I didn't get a chance to do my work. But that's the reality of how much we're meant to be at service of others. But how do we allow future leaders and existing leaders in our restaurants to surrender and block time to give themselves permission to work on what we need today and what's needed to move us forward? Logically, it makes sense, but we're working with people to literally put this in their calendars in red with do not disturb, connections to their phones, to give themselves permission. Because once we see the return on time or the compound impact of the behavior, it'll say that works, that feels good, and my job gets easier. But it's just sharing with your team those words. They'll understand them, but we feel we need to be at service of others. So how do we create the behavior? And often with senior leaders, what I do when we're originally starting a coaching agreement, I'm often meeting in somebody's big fancy office overlooking a lake or across a big boardroom table where I couldn't touch them if I wanted to because the boardroom table is so big. About halfway through the session, I'll ask them to turn their laptop around because I'll see them looking at the dinging or the buzzing, and I ask them to show me their calendar. And it's been a few dozen times now where as soon as they show the calendar, because we've built some rapport and trust, there's hands in face. I've seen tears rolling down their cheeks. And the reason being, it doesn't matter if you're, a new supervisor, a manager, a director, or you're the owner. It's really that balance of how do we put first things first in our priorities. And sometimes it's just accepting that what we're doing right now isn't working. Or it's harder than it should be. And I say this respectfully. Everybody watching this is a high performer. What you're doing is great, but is it getting you what you want and deserve? Work-life balance, profitability, money, engagement. But often just slight tweaks allow us to go to that next level. Monte, before we really kind of get into the close here, I'm really excited about the evolution of your book and what we've got coming. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about the book and a couple of the core concepts in it, and a little bit more information just about it, because I can't wait to have it on my shelf as well. But yeah, I just want to give some space and time because I think it's exactly what many people in the industry want and need right now.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that, and I'd love for you to read it and give me your thoughts. One quick thing on what you just said is, we had this conversation before the podcast. I suffer from ADD as well, and it works really well on the floor. Yeah. You can multitask and do a ton of things at once, but I have the tendency to chase squirrels, and so I've had to create some time management things where I only check my email certain times of the day. I don't look at it. I don't have alerts on my phone, so I'm constantly being distracted.
100%.
And so it's things like that, creating some boundaries for yourself that really help in that area. So I just wanted to add that, because I know that you and I and Jay all have our issues when it comes to that.
For those that miss it, we had a little pre-call, and the three of us have high functioning ADHD in however you want to define it. And I agree with Monte. Many people out there can relate, and it can be a superpower, but at also times we have to create boundaries or structure for ourselves. And one of the best practices got shared with me at a session with Entrepreneurs Organization about 15 years ago, where somebody showed us how to get into Microsoft Outlook at the time and turn the alerts off. It was buried. Like you had to know somebody in the IT space to turn it off. But do you have buzzing? And I love Apple Watches for those that wear them. But when I'm in meetings and someone's having a conversation and they're looking at their text message while their leader's sitting across from, the divide in attention. And so how can we, if there's a best practice Monte share, do as you wish, but the more alerts that you can shut off and respond to on your schedule, not the buzzing alarm, the more at flow we take. So it proves that it takes about 14 to 21 minutes to get into flow on an activity. And once it's broken, we can take up to 2 hours to get back to flow. And there's a bunch of research done on this. So even if we're a fraction of that transition, any type of distraction can really take us away from what we're looking to accomplish. But not to get too deep in that, if you're willing, try turning your notifications off for a day, a week, a month, and see the impact on your workflow. Tell us about this book.
Yeah, so I'm super excited. So I started not podcasting. I started blogging on LinkedIn a few years ago, pre-COVID, and all of a sudden I had basically enough material to write a couple books. And so the first one that's coming out in a couple months is called Shift Happens. And it's a play on, another phrase that's very popular. And it really talks about the last 50 years, what our false beliefs were in the industry and how that didn't create successful businesses and successful models for us. And through that, there was a lot of restaurants that went under. There were a lot of people that experienced, depression or addiction or something else. And it really wreaked havoc on our industry. And so I started thinking about what are 7 things that I did pre-COVID, over the last 10 or so years that really worked for me, that were against the grain of what the rest of the industry was doing. And so that developed into Shift Happens, which is 7 strategies to crush the new norm. And so I go through and I first talk about mindset, shifting our mindset and how important that is. James Clear wrote a book called Atomic Habits. Yeah. Takes about 60 or 90 days to really change your habits, 67 days, I think it is. Yeah. So I created like 90-day coaching sessions where I would work with a client for 90 days to really help them with their muscle memory and really change the trajectory of their business. But I came up with seven things that were false beliefs in our industry, and then what's the opposite of that, and how do we change that? So I'll just kind of quickly go through the false beliefs, and if there's anything you want to mention, you feel free to. So the first false belief is underpaying your people equals profits, and I found that I'm not getting the best out of my people when I treat them that way, and I'm devaluing them and lowering my opportunity of success. The second one is marketing is too expensive, and obviously with the things available to us today, even this podcast, there's ways to market yourself in a much less expensive way than there used to be when we had radio and TV, magazine ads, billboards, things like that. False belief 3, you have to work 70 hours a week to be successful. Yeah. Again, we talked about that. That's not sustainable. False belief 4, good people are hard to find. And I believe if you become the employer of choice, people will come to you. When you have a winning team in sports, everybody wants to play on that team. So I think that that's a false belief that we believed for a very long time. And COVID, certainly we blamed everything on COVID. I can't find people. Well, there were restaurants that could find people, and I ran restaurants during COVID as well as coach some of my clients, and we all were able to attract talent. False belief 5, you're in the food and beverage business. I know we shifted that from the food and beverage industry to hospitality about 20 years ago, but I don't really think that most operators understood we went from product to people, and we went from serving food to serving people. And that's a big shift. False belief number 6, restaurants are bad investments. I think we had a broken P&L model. It was more focused on percentages, and you don't take percentages to the bank. Yeah. I challenge anyone to go to a bank and say, I'd like to deposit 20%, please. Yep. It's just not how we operate. And it creates an inverse thing where, you're talking about some of these restaurants that are losing market share. It's because we were so focused on percentages and not building a bigger pie. And then false belief 7, a penny saved is a penny earned. I believe that a penny invested for future growth is far more successful than saving a penny in the bank and waiting for a rainy day. And if you know that if you take a penny and you double it on the next day, and then you double the 2 cents the next day, and you keep exponentially doubling day after day, after 31 days, you have over $10 million. And so just understanding that growth and building a bigger pie and investing in your infrastructure and your people will create better benefit than saving that penny.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with how important all 7 of those topics are, and what I hope we all, when the book's available, put our hands on it to really look at the context of it. Because again, understanding is one thing, but understanding and taking different. That penny saved is a penny earned. I just had a conversation before this where a group had some carryover dollars that they reinvested back to the ownership group, and what the leader said to me was, what if we put that into our guest experience? What would the multiplying effect be if we put that into our guest experience? And just that clarity. So we're actually repositioning to say, hey, if we took that 50 grand or whichever it was and really doubled down and invested it in clear, measurable strategies, would be willing to take that risk for the ROI, for the scalability. So not for today, but for our future. As Monte said, if you want to have an orange tree, you got to plant orange seeds. That's just a funny thing for me is looking at, I never even thought of an orange tree growing from orange seeds. That's the simplicity of me and up here in Canada. Monte, there's so much incredible value shared here today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. But what I want is, Monte, Sean Walchef shared this recently. I think he got it from Ryan Reynolds, is strangely accessible. Is something Ryan Reynolds said in some work that Sean was doing. And one thing with Monte is he is strangely accessible for those that are looking to make change in a positive way. But it starts with following him. The first thing I'm going to do, because I'm really excited about this, Monte, I'm going to Nashville in July to see Chris Stapleton and George Strait. Bucket list concert for me. I don't know the country fans out there, but as a Canadian kid going to see Chris Stapleton, and as a Garth Brooks fan, you got to go see George Strait as the cowboy rides away. So I can't wait to get down to Nashville if you've got any advice. But I thank you for sharing your experience from the U.S. Jay, thank you for putting all of this effort. Somebody who does work 70 hours out of art, passion, and joy, not requirement, is Mr. Jay Ashton. I think our industry here in Canada and beyond cannot be more grateful for him and his efforts and his platform. But Monte, thanks for joining us today. I'm cueing Jay right now, so to make sure he is not asleep on this, because he's
I'm not sleeping. I've been writing notes.
Great. I don't know if he's as great as I just said that he was. The guy's pretty darn great. But thank you, Monte. We're gonna really cut some key parts out of this. This is one of the episodes that I'm a student, not a host with Jay. Thank you for allowing me to be your student today, Monte. I took so much. I've got a page of notes here that if I really just slow down and focus on, could change my own businesses. And I thank you for that.
Well, I thank you. It was awesome to finally connect and be on the show. I know that we've had some conversations in the past, but just being able to collaborate and share our knowledge with North America and beyond. I think it's, I mentioned this on another podcast I was on recently, that it's going to take all of us to really make this change. And I appreciate the collective nature that you and Jay have of creating symbiotic relationships to help our industry.
And if you're going to the bar and restaurant show, right? So you'll be there, Monte?
Yeah, I'm speaking on people and processes at the show, so it's pretty exciting. Two things.
Amazing show. Yeah, very selective talks. Catch Monte on the main stage as they go. They've got their speaking room there. Very selective on their speakers, which shows the platform. If you're going down, be sure to jump in that session and check it out. Mr. Ashton, where are you at, my man? Yeah. Thank you for the
space. Right here. Okay. I'm right here. But thank you again. I thank both of you. There's just, I sit here and I listen. I've actually made notes, so it's good when I make notes. But I also
never said that to me, Monte. He's never once said.
Yeah,
but he read your book 14 times, right?
What is the deal?
I read that book that's on your shelf 14 times. Yeah. But no, this has been awesome. Thank you both, and I just so appreciative. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Footy Nation.
There you go.
And we have to close it out with the Go Leafs Go.
Oh boy,
yeah.
Not the Rock.
To do that. Yeah, we'll cut that out. Awesome. Thanks both of you. Everyone else have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.